I never imagined that a routine Tuesday morning at the Riverside Mall parking garage would alter the entire trajectory of my life. My name is Sarah Martinez, and for the past 3 years, I've worked as a parking attendant at one of the busiest shopping centers in downtown Chicago. It's not glamorous work, checking tickets, collecting fees, helping lost customers find their cars, but it pays the bills and gives me time to study for my nursing degree at night. That particular morning started like any other. The autumn air was crisp, and I was making my usual rounds through Level B when I noticed something glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. Wedged between 2 parked cars, partially hidden beneath a pile of fallen leaves, was an elegant leather briefcase. My first instinct was to turn it into the lost and found, but something made me pause. The briefcase was exquisite, genuine Italian leather with gold-plated hardware that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. It felt surprisingly heavy in my hands, and when I gently shook it, I could hear papers rustling inside. The combination lock was set to 000, almost as if someone had left it open intentionally. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully opened the case. What I saw inside made my breath catch in my throat. Stacks upon stacks of $100 bills were neatly arranged alongside official-looking documents. I'd never seen so much cash in one place. It had to be at least $100,000, maybe more. My hands trembled as I quickly closed the briefcase. This wasn't just lost property. This was someone's life savings, or worse, money that belonged to dangerous people. Growing up in a rough neighborhood had taught me that this kind of cash rarely came from legitimate sources. Every instinct told me to walk away, to pretend I'd never found it. But then I thought about Mrs. Chin from apartment 3B in my building, who'd been crying last week because she couldn't afford her heart medication. I thought about my younger brother Miguel, who'd been working 2 jobs just to afford community college. I thought about my own student loans and the stack of overdue bills on my kitchen table. No one would ever know. I could take just a small amount, enough to help my family, enough to pay for my textbooks next semester. Who would miss a few thousand from such a vast fortune? The briefcase had been abandoned. Maybe its owner was already long gone. Maybe they were criminals who didn't deserve it anyway. I stood there in that dimly lit parking garage for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, weighing my options. The angel on one shoulder whispered about doing the right thing, while the devil on the other painted pictures of financial freedom and the ability to help everyone I loved. But as I stared down at that briefcase, I remembered something my grandmother used to tell me. Mija, your character isn't defined by what you do when people are watching. It's defined by what you do when no one is looking. She'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, and her words had guided me through every major decision in my life. Taking a deep breath, I closed the briefcase securely and made my way to the mall's security office. The head of security, Frank Rodriguez, was a kind man in his 50s who'd always treated me with respect. When I explained what I'd found, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Sarah, do you realize what you've just done?" he asked, carefully examining the briefcase. Most people would have walked away with this and no one would have been the wiser. Together we contacted the police, who arrived within 20 minutes. Detective Williams, a sharp-eyed woman with graying hair, took my statement and praised me for my honesty. She explained that they'd run the serial numbers on the bills and check for any reports of missing money, but these cases often went unsolved. As I watched them take the briefcase away, I felt a strange mixture of pride and regret. I'd done the right thing, but I couldn't help wondering if I'd just thrown away the answer to all my problems. Little did I know that my decision to return that money would set in motion a chain of events that would prove my grandmother right in ways I never could have imagined. That night, I went home to my small studio apartment and tried to focus on my anatomy homework, but my mind kept wandering back to that briefcase. I'd made my choice and there was no going back now. 3 days passed without a word about the briefcase. I'd almost convinced myself that it would remain another unsolved case in Detective Williams' files when my phone rang during my lunch break on Friday. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled me to answer. "Miss Martinez?" The voice was elderly, refined, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood. I believe you found something that belongs to me." My heart skipped a beat. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "The briefcase, dear. The one you turned in to the police 3 days ago. I've been searching for it everywhere." Her voice carried a warmth that immediately put me at ease, yet there was something else beneath it. a carefully controlled emotion that I couldn't identify. Oh, is it? I found it in the parking garage where I work. I turned it over to the authorities immediately. I was surprised by how defensive I sounded. I know you did, child. Detective Williams told me everything. She said you could have easily walked away with it, but you chose to do the right thing. There was a pause and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. Would you be willing to meet with me? There's something I need to tell you, something the police don't know. Every warning bell in my head was ringing. This could be a trap, a setup by criminals who wanted their money back. But there was something about Eleanor's voice, a genuine gratitude mixed with what sounded like desperation, that made me curious despite my fears. I don't know if that's a good idea, I said carefully. Maybe you should speak with Detective Williams directly. Please, Sarah. May I call you Sarah? When I didn't object, she continued. I'm 78 years old and I've been carrying the weight of that briefcase for longer than you've been alive. What you did, it's given me hope that there are still good people in this world. I just want to thank you properly. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a small cafe near the mall the following afternoon. I chose a public place and told Frank Rodriguez where I'd be just in case. The rest of my shift dragged by as I wondered what Eleanor Blackwood could possibly want to tell me. Saturday afternoon found me sitting in Rosie's diner, nervously checking my phone every few minutes. I'd arrived early and chosen a booth near the window where I could see the parking lot. At exactly 2 p.m., a black sedan pulled up and an elderly woman stepped out. She was impeccably dressed in a navy blue coat and moved with the grace of someone who had once been very wealthy. Eleanor Blackwood was not what I had expected. She was petite, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and kind blue eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets. But it was her smile that caught me off guard. It was the same smile I'd seen in my grandmother's photographs, warm and genuine despite years of hardship. Sarah, she said, extending a gloved hand. Thank you for agreeing to see me. As she settled into the booth across from me, I studied her more carefully. Her clothes were expensive but well-worn, and I noticed her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the menu. There was something fragile about her, as if she were holding herself together through sheer force of will. The briefcase, I began, but she held up a hand to stop me. Before we discuss that, I want you to know that what you did was extraordinary. In my 78 years, I've met very few people with your kind of integrity. She paused, studying my face. You have your grandmother's eyes, you know. I froze. I'm sorry, what did you say? Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. Your grandmother, Rosa Martinez. You have her eyes, kind but strong. She would have been so proud of what you did. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. How did you know my grandmother? We were friends, dear. Very close friends, though we lost touch many years ago. Eleanor's voice became soft, almost wistful. She wrote to me about you, you know. About how you were studying to become a nurse. How proud she was of the young woman you'd become. She sent me a photograph of your high school graduation. I felt tears prick my eyes. My grandmother had died 2 years ago and I'd thought I knew everything about her life. I don't understand. She never mentioned you. There's a lot your grandmother never told you, Sarah. About her past, about the choices she made, about the people she helped. Eleanor reached across the table and gently touched my hand. That money in the briefcase. It's connected to your grandmother in ways you couldn't imagine. My mind was reeling. What do you mean? Eleanor glanced around the diner, then leaned forward conspiratorially. Your grandmother saved my life once in ways that went far beyond money. I've been trying to repay that debt for 40 years. But I never knew how to find you after she passed. When Detective Williams told me about what you'd done, about your name and where you worked, I knew it was fate. I still don't understand what this has to do with the briefcase. That money, Eleanor said quietly, was meant for you. It always has been. Your grandmother and I made a pact long ago, and I've been waiting for the right moment to honor it. When you returned that briefcase instead of keeping it, you proved that you're exactly the person Rosa always said you were. The diner suddenly felt too small, too warm. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. What kind of pact? Eleanor smiled sadly. The kind that changes everything, dear. But first, you need to understand the story behind it all. Are you ready to learn the truth about your grandmother's past? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready for anything. But as Eleanor began to speak, I realized that my simple act of honesty had unlocked a door to a world I never knew existed. A world that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and my future. Eleanor's story began in 1962, in a small town outside of Mexico City where my grandmother Rosa had been working as a seamstress. I knew almost nothing about this period of her life. She'd always been vague about her years before immigrating to the United States, changing the subject whenever I asked too many questions. Your grandmother was 19 then, beautiful and full of dreams, Eleanor said, her eyes distant with memory. I was 25, married to a man named Richard Blackwood who worked for the American Embassy. We'd been living in Mexico for 2 years and I was struggling. She paused to sip her coffee, and I noticed her hands were steadier now, as if telling this story was somehow grounding her. Richard was not a good man, Sarah. He was charming in public, but behind closed doors he was cruel. Violent. I was trapped in a foreign country with no friends, no family, and no way to escape. I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened? I met your grandmother at the market one day. I'd been trying to buy fabric to make curtains for our house, but my Spanish was terrible and I was getting frustrated. Richard had hit me the night before and I had a black eye that I was trying to hide behind sunglasses. Rosa saw through my disguise immediately. Eleanor's voice became softer, filled with a gratitude that had aged like fine wine. She didn't just help me buy the fabric. She invited me to her home, fed me, and listened to me cry for hours. I told her things I'd never told another soul. About the abuse, about my fear, about how I felt like I was disappearing a little more each day. That sounds like Abuela, I said quietly. My grandmother had always been the one neighbors turned to in times of crisis. The woman who showed up with food and comfort whenever someone was hurting. But Rosa did more than just listen, Eleanor continued. She began teaching me Spanish, really teaching me so I could navigate the world around me. She introduced me to other women in the community, created a support network I desperately needed. For the first time in years I felt like I had a friend. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a small, faded photograph. It showed 2 young women sitting on a stone wall, laughing at something outside the camera's view. One was clearly my grandmother, though younger than I'd ever seen her. The other was Eleanor, decades younger but with the same kind eyes. We became like sisters, Eleanor said, tracing the edge of the photo with her finger. But then everything changed. Richard found out about our friendship. He was furious that I'd been spending time with locals, as he called them. He forbade me from seeing Rosa, but I couldn't stay away. She was the only light in my very dark world. The story took a darker turn. Richard had begun following Eleanor, becoming increasingly paranoid and violent. One night he'd discovered a letter Rosa had written to her, and his rage had escalated to a level that terrified Eleanor. She'd fled to Rosa's house, bloody and broken, begging for help. What your grandmother did next was incredibly brave, Eleanor said, her voice filled with awe even after all these years. She didn't just offer me shelter. She helped me disappear. She had connections, people who could help someone start over with a new identity if necessary. But it wasn't free. What do you mean? The people who helped me required payment. A lot of money. More than I had access to. Rosa had been saving for years to bring her own family to America, money she'd earned through grueling work and careful planning. Without hesitation she gave it all to help me escape. I felt my breath catch. She gave up her own dreams to save you? She gave up everything, Eleanor confirmed. Because of what she sacrificed, it took her 5 more years to save enough money to immigrate to the United States. 5 years of separation from the family she loved. 5 years of working even harder to rebuild what she'd given away. The weight of this revelation settled over me like a heavy blanket. My grandmother had never mentioned any of this, had never once complained about the struggles she'd faced or the sacrifice she'd made for a friend. But that's not the end of the story, Eleanor said, leaning forward. After I escaped Mexico with my new identity, I met someone else. A good man named Thomas Whitmore. We fell in love, married, and he adopted me as his own. Thomas was a successful businessman and together we built a small empire. Hotels, restaurants, real estate investments. We became very wealthy. And you never forgot what Rosa had done for you. Never. I tried to find her for years, but she'd moved to Chicago and remarried. By the time I tracked her down, she was already settled in her new life. I sent her money, tried to repay what she'd given me, but she always sent it back. She said helping me had been its own reward. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. But I never stopped trying to find a way to honor her sacrifice. When she wrote to me about you, about how you were working to become a nurse while struggling financially, I knew I'd found my answer. I started setting aside money for your education, for your future. That briefcase contained your inheritance, Sarah, and not from your grandmother directly, but from the life she made possible for me. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything I'd heard. The briefcase, the money, Eleanor herself. It was all connected to a story of sacrifice and friendship that had begun before I was even born. But why leave it in a parking garage? I asked. Why not just contact me directly? Eleanor's smile was mysterious. Because I needed to know what kind of person you really were. Anyone can be honest when they know they're being watched. But true character reveals itself in moments when no one is looking. Your grandmother knew that, and she raised you to understand it too. As the implications of her words sank in, I realized that my simple decision to return the briefcase had been more than just doing the right thing. It had been a test I never knew I was taking. The revelation that the briefcase had been a test left me feeling both honored and unsettled. Eleanor explained that she'd been planning this for months, working with a private investigator to learn my routines, my schedule, my daily habits. The briefcase had been placed in that parking garage deliberately, positioned where I would find it during my morning rounds. I know it sounds manipulative, Eleanor said, reading the confusion on my face. But I had to know. Your grandmother's sacrifice deserved to be honored by someone worthy of it. I couldn't simply hand you a fortune without knowing you'd use it responsibly. But what if I had taken the money? I asked. What if I'd failed your test? Eleanor's expression grew sad. Then I would have known that Rosa's sacrifice had been wasted on someone who didn't inherit her values. The money would have gone to charity, and I would have lived with the knowledge that I'd failed to find a way to properly honor her memory. The weight of what could have been pressed down on me. In that moment in the parking garage, I'd literally held my future in my hands and hadn't even known it. If I'd succumbed to temptation, if I'd justified taking even a small amount, I would have lost everything without ever knowing what I'd lost. How much money was in the briefcase? I asked, still struggling to believe this was real. $250,000, Eleanor said quietly. Enough to pay for your nursing school, to help your family, to give you the fresh start your grandmother always dreamed you'd have. I felt dizzy. $250,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having. But beyond the financial implications, I was grappling with a deeper realization. My grandmother had been living with the knowledge of this plan for years, never telling me, never hinting at the extraordinary friend she'd helped decades ago. Did she know? I asked. About the test, I mean? Eleanor shook her head. Rosa died before I could finalize the details. But she knew I was planning something for you. In her last letter to me, she wrote about how proud she was of your integrity, how you'd rather work 3 jobs than compromise your principles. She said you were her greatest achievement. Tears began flowing down my cheeks. I'd thought I'd grieved fully for my grandmother, but learning about this hidden chapter of her life brought the loss flooding back with new intensity. She'd been so much more than I'd ever known, not just the loving woman who'd raised me, but a hero who'd sacrificed her own dreams to save someone else's life. There's something else, Eleanor said gently. Something I haven't told you yet. I looked up, wiping my eyes. What? The money in the briefcase. It's not just a one-time gift. It's the beginning of something much larger. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a legal document. Thomas and I never had children. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left everything to me, but I've been waiting for the right person to continue our legacy. She slid the document across the table. It was thick, official-looking, with letterhead from a prestigious law firm. This is a trust fund, Sarah. If you accept it, you'll receive the initial $250,000 immediately, plus quarterly payments of $50,000 for the next 20 years. But there are conditions. My hands shook as I picked up the document. What kind of conditions? First, you must complete your nursing degree. Education was important to your grandmother, and it's important to me. Second, you must agree to help others the way Rosa helped me. The trust includes funding for a scholarship program in your grandmother's name, and you'll be responsible for selecting recipients. I stared at the papers, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. I don't understand. Why me? Why such a huge responsibility? Because you're Rosa's granddaughter, Eleanor said simply. Because you proved in that parking garage that you have the same integrity she did. Because I believe you'll use this opportunity to make the world a little bit better, just like she did. The third condition was the most surprising. You'll also be inheriting my home in Lake Forest, Eleanor continued. It's a beautiful house, much too big for one person. I'm moving to a retirement community next month, and I'd like to know the house will be lived in by someone who understands the value of family and sacrifice. I felt like I was in a dream. A few days ago I'd been struggling to pay for textbooks, and now I was being offered a complete transformation of my life. But with the opportunity came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. What if I'm not ready for this? I asked. What if I disappoint you or dishonor my grandmother's memory? Eleanor reached across the table and took my hands in hers. Do you know what your grandmother wrote in her last letter to me? She said, Eleanor, I've taught Sarah that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you touch and the difference you make. You've already proven you understand that lesson. As I sat there in Rosie's diner holding papers that would change my life forever, I thought about all the small decisions that had led to this moment. Choosing to work an honest job instead of looking for shortcuts. Deciding to pursue nursing despite the financial challenges. And most importantly, choosing to do the right thing when no one was watching. There's one more thing, Eleanor said, her voice becoming more serious. The private investigator I hired, he discovered something else while researching your background. Something that might complicate things. My heart sank. What kind of complication? It's about your father, Sarah. About the accident that killed your parents. The investigator found evidence that it might not have been an accident after all. The document slipped from my numb fingers. Everything I thought I knew about my past was being rewritten, and I was beginning to understand that accepting Eleanor's gift might come with consequences I couldn't yet imagine. The diner around us seemed to fade away as Eleanor's words hung in the air. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 12. That's what I'd always been told, what I'd believed for the past 15 years. The idea that it might have been something else was almost too much to process. What do you mean it might not have been an accident? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's expression was grave. When I hired the investigator to learn about your background, he discovered some inconsistencies in the police report from that night. Questions that were never properly answered, evidence that was overlooked or dismissed too quickly. She pulled out a manila folder from her purse and set it on the table between us. I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but after what you've done, after seeing the kind of person you are, I think you have a right to know the truth. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of police reports, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be private investigator notes. The papers detailed the night of November 15, 2010, a date burned into my memory forever. According to the original report, Eleanor explained, your father's car skidded on black ice and hit a tree. But the investigator found weather reports from that night. There was no freezing rain, no ice. The road conditions were clear. I stared at the weather data, my mind struggling to reconcile this information with what I'd always believed. But the police said. The police concluded their investigation very quickly. Too quickly, according to my investigator. Your father had been working as an accountant for Meridian Industries, and he'd been asking questions about certain financial discrepancies he'd discovered. He'd scheduled a meeting with federal authorities for the following week. The room was spinning. My father had been a quiet man, methodical and honest, who'd taught me the importance of attention to detail. The idea that he'd uncovered something significant enough to get him killed seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right in front of me. There's more, Eleanor continued gently. The investigator discovered that your father had been in contact with someone from the FBI's white-collar crime division. He'd been gathering evidence about embezzlement and fraud at Meridian Industries, evidence that disappeared after his death. I looked up from the papers, tears blurring my vision. Are you saying my parents were murdered? I'm saying there are too many questions that were never answered. Your father was close to exposing something that would have destroyed some very powerful people. 3 days after he died, the FBI investigation into Meridian Industries was quietly closed. The implications were staggering. Not only had I lost my parents, but I'd potentially lost them to the same kind of corruption and greed that my father had spent his life fighting against. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. But why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why didn't this come out 15 years ago? Eleanor's expression darkened. Because some of the people involved in covering up the truth are still alive, still powerful. And because accepting the inheritance I'm offering you might put you in danger. What do you mean? The money in the briefcase, the trust fund, it's all legitimate, but it's also substantial. People will notice when a parking garage attendant suddenly has access to this kind of wealth. If there are still people out there who were involved in your father's death, they might see you as a threat. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. A few hours ago, I'd thought I was simply meeting a grateful woman who wanted to thank me for my honesty. Now I was learning that my entire life had been built on lies, and that accepting a fortune might put me in the crosshairs of dangerous people. What do you think I should do? I asked. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. I think you should do what your grandmother would have done, what she did when she helped me all those years ago. You should choose courage over safety, truth over comfort. She reached across the table and took my hand. The investigator is still working on the case. He believes there's enough evidence to reopen the investigation into your parents' death, but he needs resources to continue his work. Part of the trust fund could be used to fund that investigation. You're saying I could use the money to find out what really happened to my parents? I'm saying you could use it to seek justice. Not just for your parents, but for everyone who was hurt by the corruption your father was trying to expose. It's what he would have wanted. I stared down at the trust fund documents, seeing them in an entirely new light. This wasn't just about securing my financial future. It was about completing the work my father had started, about honoring the sacrifice my parents had made for the truth. There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. Something I haven't told you about your grandmother's story. I looked up, wondering what other revelations could possibly be waiting. When Rosa helped me escape from Mexico, she wasn't just saving me from my abusive husband. She was saving me from becoming part of a larger conspiracy. Richard was involved in smuggling money and artifacts out of Mexico for wealthy American collectors. He wanted me to be his accomplice, to use my embassy connections to facilitate his crimes. And by helping you escape, she was disrupting his operation? She was destroying it. The people Richard was working with lost millions of dollars because of what Rosa did. They never found out who helped me, but they spent years looking for revenge. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. That's why it took her so long to come to America. She wasn't just rebuilding her savings. She was waiting for it to be safe. Eleanor nodded. Your grandmother understood that doing the right thing sometimes comes with a price. She paid that price gladly, and she raised you to understand that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the cost. I looked around the diner one more time, realizing that this would be the last moment of my old life. Whatever I decided to do next would define not just my future, but the legacy of the people who had loved me and shaped me. I'll take the inheritance, I said finally. All of it. The money, the house, the responsibility. And I want to hire the investigator to continue his work. Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since we'd met, she looked truly at peace. Your grandmother would be so proud. As I signed the trust fund documents, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. It had started with a simple decision to do the right thing, but it had led me to discover a hidden world of sacrifice, courage, and love that spanned generations. I was no longer just Sarah Martinez, the parking garage attendant who was struggling to pay for nursing school. I was the granddaughter of a woman who had risked everything to save a friend, the daughter of a man who had died fighting for justice, and the inheritor of a legacy that would allow me to continue their work. The briefcase had been returned, but what I got in return was so much more than money. I got the truth about my family, the resources to seek justice, and the opportunity to make a difference in the world. Most importantly, I got the knowledge that doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, can change everything. As Eleanor and I left the diner that day, I realized that my real life was just beginning. The test had been passed, the inheritance accepted, and the truth revealed. Now it was time to live up to the example set by the extraordinary people who had come before me. The parking garage attendant who had returned a lost fortune was gone. In her place stood someone ready to change the world, one honest decision at a time. To support the channel, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much.